Hello and welcome to session 8, our final session together in our fall life group series here, going through the book of Titus. Today we are ending our good life discussion. We have been journeying through the 3 chapters in the book of Titus, Paul's words to this young leader in this church environment, that he might set up and establish churches on this island of Crete, an island nation that was adverse to God and the things of the gospel. In a challenging and uniquely difficult place, Paul sent Titus so that he could establish churches that confront falsehood and that stand for what is good, that they seek to live out the good life. We've been talking these last several weeks together. The response to the great good truth of God is a life of good behavior, of obedience to him. And today we are ending our look in the last few verses in chapter 3. But before we get there, a quick review. Chapter 1, we're reminded from the very beginning that it is a trustworthy God that we're called to follow, and that because God is trustworthy, we could submit our life to the good life as he defines it, not as we do. At the end of chapter 1, then we talked about the need to have good leaders, men of character and competence, men that are committed to the core of the message of the gospel, and that these individuals as well must be ready to confront falsehood, to make sure false teachers and leaders that would manipulate and take advantage are addressed. There's a lot that he covers in the first chapter. In chapter 2, then he starts to talk about the way the good life is lived out in our relationships, in our families. And he talks about the family structure in the first century of older men, older women, younger women, the slave-master relationship. And into this, Titus is given instruction of how they are to live differently so that the gospel might be an attractive thing for the world to watch and notice, that they might scratch their head and say, what's so different about these Christian families? We ended then chapter 2 talking about the grace of God, that good grace of God being the foundation for any type of relationships like this. Then in chapter 3, we talked about the idea that to live the good life in the world means that we don't just hide away and cloister ourselves. We are not combative, fighting culture wars, but we are seeking to be a faithful presence for God wherever he has placed us in this world, that we might humbly and boldly stand up for him, not being conformed to the world, but setting ourselves apart. And as well, in chapter 3, we talked about the importance of challenging division in our families, but especially as it relates in chapter 3 of Titus in the church. How the church of God is to be committed to preserving itself in its core commitment to the gospel, and that we're not to get distracted by foolish arguments and genealogies. Remember, he talked about it. That we're not to be giving platforms for those that might sow division and distrust amongst the people of God, but that we're to address them head on, ultimately pointing people to the good life, which is knowing the good news of Jesus, salvation in him, and living a life in obedience as a result. The good life. It's important for this church in the first century to recognize and obey, and for us as well in our personal lives and as a church, we must always seek to live lives that are obedient to God in reflection on the gospel in our families, in our world, confronting falsehood, standing for truth, always relying on the trustworthiness of our God. And so into that, we have the final few verses of the book. In fact, it's verses that normally when you come upon them in your Bible reading, you may go through it quickly. Paul would often have at the end of his letters personal remarks referencing various individuals and giving instructions to who he is sending the letter to on how he is to treat others around him. And you know what I think we glean from these last 4 verses here is that there's this promise for the follower of God, that we are not alone in our mission to know and follow him. That partnership in our personal lives and in ministry together through the church, we are to rely on each other. We need each other. If I could summarize those last few verses, that would be it. We need each other. We're not alone. We need to encourage and support. I want to read these verses and then show us just 3 final thoughts that I think Paul lays out for us as we think about living a life that relies on the people God has placed in our life to follow him. This is chapter 3, verses 12 to 15. He says, "When I send Artemis or Tychicus to you, make every effort to come to me in Nicopolis, because I have decided to spend the winter there. Diligently help Zenas the lawyer and Apollos on their journey, so that they will lack nothing. Let our people learn to devote themselves to good works for pressing needs, so that they will not be unfruitful. All those who are with me send you greetings. Greet those who love us in the faith. Grace be with you all." Here's Paul in his final moments giving his final pastoral words of encouragement to Titus and to the church there. He starts off by saying that there are going to be men that are going to come and relieve you, and he calls them Artemis and Tychicus. It's interesting, you read these names and you wonder, what are their backstories? Well, Artemis, we don't really know much about him anywhere else in the New Testament. But Tychicus, we know, was an individual that Paul would often use in his ministry to bring letters. He carried certain of his other epistles and letters to be brought to the other churches, Philippians and likewise. So Tychicus was a partner in ministry. Tychicus was an individual along with Artemis who were coming to relieve Titus while he then went to join Paul in this other city called Nicopolis. In other words, Paul looks at Titus and says, I'm going to send help. I'm going to send help your way. And what they are to do is to take over and to continue on the role that you are doing so that you could be released to something else. You know what I think we learn here in this little verse is that receiving help in life and ministry, humbly receiving help, it reveals our humility and the primacy of the gospel in our lives. What do I mean by that? When we receive help, when we humbly receive help and hand off ministry, hand off responsibilities, hand off leadership to others, what we are saying is, God, I am humble enough to recognize that it's not all dependent on me to get things done. That Titus, think of what he could have said in response to this from Paul. Paul, Crete is my territory. This is my island. I'm the one who wants to be here to make sure these churches go the way they're supposed to. How can I trust who will come on, that they will take it to the way that they need to do? You can see there being the opportunity for there to be turf wars and discord. And Paul says, receive this help. It enables us to be humble and to recognize that the ultimate thing that is to be prime in our life is the primacy of the gospel. It is the preeminence, the importance, the elevation of the gospel above my name, above my ministry, above my involvement. Do you see what Paul is subtly reminding Titus here of? It's not all about you, my friend. It's about humbly recognizing the role you play for a time and a season, discerning that, and then remembering that God brings other people in line to keep that mission moving forward, that the baton has been passed. Some of you are maybe in a ministry position, or maybe you're in a role, responsibility in your family, and you see that a season is coming to an end. And you see others that are rising up to take those mantles and those reins and those batons. Humbly pass it on, because it's not about us. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's about the gospel. It's about encouraging those that might rise up, that next generation, that they might carry the mission forward. But secondly, we see as well 2 other men he mentions, Zenas and Apollos. And listen to what he says to them. Help Zenas and Apollos on their journey so they will lack nothing. Zenas is referenced as a lawyer. Here he is. He's not a full-fledged clergy member in our modern day understanding. He's not a pastor. He's a lawyer that God is using in this missionary movement in the 1st century and here on the island of Crete to play his unique role to help advance the kingdom. He says Zenas is coming. He needs help. Support him. He mentions Apollos. Apollos, who we know elsewhere in the book of Acts as a wonderful orator and speaker, someone with great talents that we do not know if Titus had, but he is at least not mentioned as having them in the New Testament. Think about what Paul is saying to Titus. Now, not only have you to receive help, I want you to release help in the life and in the ministry that demonstrates your commitment to the mission, that it's greater than yourself. Support, help, come alongside this lawyer and this great orator, financially, relationally, whatever way you need to, releasing help, releasing the things that God has given your hands so that they can succeed and excel and do well. It's living open-handedly. I love to use this phrase. I talk about it oftentimes in counseling with individuals, that God calls us to each other's lives for a season, and we're not to be grippy and to hold on. We're to be open-handed and say, Lord, how might I use the resources in my hand, the opportunity, the experiences, Lord, to release others into service for you, to faithful, obedient service for you? How can I come alongside? I love that idea of partnering and coming alongside. We receive help, we get to release it. Who in your life is God calling you to release and support and encourage in their marriage, in their workplace, in the mission field, through finances, through time with them, through encouragement and prayer and support? Will you release help and demonstrate your commitment to a mission that is greater than yourself? I could think in my life of men and women who have released help to me financially, emotionally, relationally, in prayer support, in training, in equipping, in confronting blind spots in my life. Why? So that the mission can go forward. Will you be that kind of person? Will you accept help? And will you release it? And then thirdly, we see it there in the last few verses here. He says, let our people learn to devote themselves to good works for pressing needs so that we'll not be unfruitful. You see, lastly, we need to remind each other to do good and that it never gets old because it's too easy to forget. He says, remind them to devote themselves to good works, that they might be addressing pressing needs, that they may not be unfruitful. In other words, you can be forgetful to prune and to grow and to be fruitful in ministry and just get into a stream where you're just going through the motions. He's saying, remind each other why you are here. We all need that, don't we? We need those cheerleaders. We need those men and women in our life that come alongside and remind us why we're here. I was recently talking with a friend of mine. I was sharing with him some challenges and discouragements. And he sent me a message, and it just was a word for the time. He sent me a message that God does not make mistakes. Don't be distracted. Stay committed. And brothers and sisters, that's what we need to do with each other. That's how we need to encourage partnership. Remind ourselves that we're not alone. We need to surround ourselves with people that are going to constantly point us to why we are here. In our families, to stay committed to our wives and our husbands, to stay committed to our kids, to fear the cheerleading in our corner when we want to stay committed to serving God and being faithful to Him in His church and in His community. Remind each other of why we're here all the time. Why? Because it's too easy to get forgetful, to forget why we're here. When discouragements come, when challenges arise, when uncertainty is there, we lose our memory. We forget, we lose our focus. So, the three final thoughts for Paul to Titus, and from Titus now in the scriptures to us. First, receive help. Your time in a certain ministry, your time in a certain season in life with your family may be coming to an end. Be humble and be committed to the message of Jesus. Receive that help like Titus did from Artemis and Tychicus, and pass the baton. Also, release help. In other words, what skills, what resources, what finances has God given into your hand that he wants you to release? Demonstrating the commitment is not to hoarding these things, but to a mission that is greater than yourself. Like Zenos, this lawyer, and Apollos, this great orator and preacher who would come, it was Titus who was called to give them support. Who must you release support and help to? And then lastly, remind yourself of why you're here. It is to know the good news of Jesus and to share it. Will you do good? Will you not get discouraged and give in when the obstacles become so great? Remind yourself of why we are here. The good life of knowing God and following him. Let's not forget. Let's make those sacrifices so that we could see the work of the gospel change lives. Don't forget to live and believe and cherish and nurture the good life. Well, once again, thank you for joining me in this study, just these 8 short weeks together. I hope that you'll go back and review some of the sections here in Titus and reapply them to you. There's such great fruit in this word of God that we could be applying in our life. May we be leaders that stand up. May we confront issues. May we be different in our families. May we be different in the world. And may we trust the God who always comes through. Because when we do, we get to live the good life, receiving that gospel news and living it out. God bless you, and I love you, and we'll see you again soon.